Grandpa, after the party today, my mom and dad are going to take your money, my 8-year-old granddaughter whispered to me, and the quiet certainty in her voice hit me like a sudden clap of thunder. In that instant, the warm picture I had always carried of our close, loving family cracked straight down the middle. I was a grandfather who had trusted too easily, someone who had supported them without hesitation for years. I left earlier than planned that day, pretending I was tired, hiding my shock behind a weak smile. What none of them knew was that I was already putting together a careful plan. What I did next, a deliberate and calculated response to their betrayal, would catch them completely off guard. I played their game better than they ever expected, and it is something they will remember for the rest of their lives. Dad, I know what you are probably thinking, but just listen to me for a second. My son, Mark, sounded strained as his voice cut through the quiet of my Saturday morning like a dull blade scraping metal. I nearly dropped my coffee cup onto the kitchen floor. Calls before 7 in the morning were never Mark's habit, especially not with that shaky edge in his voice. I recognized that tone immediately. It was the same nervous sound he had made years ago as a teenager when he had crashed my pickup truck and tried to explain it away. "What sounds strange now, son?" I asked calmly, easing myself back into the chair at my kitchen table. Steam curled up from my coffee as the early sunlight spilled across the unread newspaper I had not bothered to open. "Well, Jenna really wants... we both think it would be really good if you came to Lily's birthday party today." His words rushed out too fast, like something he had practiced repeatedly but still could not say naturally. A cold weight settled in my chest. Since when did my own son need to persuade me to attend my granddaughter's birthday? "Mark," I said slowly, "when have I ever missed one of Lily's birthdays?" No, that is not what I meant," he replied quickly. There was a pause, and then I heard a woman's voice in the background. Jenna's voice. Sharp. Insistent. "It is just that Jenna has been planning this party for weeks," he continued, "and she specifically asked me to call you and make sure you were coming." I stirred my coffee in slow circles, watching the cream spiral into pale swirls. "Jenna specifically asked," I said. "The same Jenna who usually treats my presence like a mild inconvenience. That is thoughtful of her." "Yeah," Mark replied with a laugh that sounded stiff and forced. "She is really excited about it." "And what time is this party?" I asked. "It starts at 2 in the afternoon," he said, then hesitated. "But maybe you could come a little earlier, around 1:30? We were hoping to talk to you about some family things." I set the spoon down, the soft clink against the mug echoing in the quiet kitchen. "Family things," I repeated. Since my wife passed away 3 years earlier, no one had ever requested a special conversation about family matters. "What kind of family things?" "Oh, you know," Mark said vaguely. "Planning. Future stuff. Jenna has some ideas about how we can all be more involved with each other." I walked over to the front window, holding the phone to my ear as I watched my neighbor across the street watering her flower boxes. Jenna, talking about family involvement. This was the same woman who had spent most of last Christmas dinner scrolling through her phone instead of speaking to anyone at the table. "That sounds nice," I replied evenly. Outwardly, my voice stayed calm, but years of running a business had sharpened my instincts. 3 decades of negotiating across conference tables had taught me exactly how it sounded when someone was trying to sell an idea they did not fully believe in themselves. "So you will come early?" Mark asked. "Around 1:30? I glanced at the refrigerator, where Lily's latest drawing was taped next to my grocery list. It showed a crooked little house with stick figures labeled in uneven handwriting. Grandpa, Daddy, Mommy, and me, all colored in with purple crayon. Since my wife, Ruth, died, that little girl had been the brightest and most consistent joy in my life. "Of course I will be there early," I said. "I would not miss Lily's day for anything." "Great," Mark replied. Then his voice dropped. "And Dad, just try to keep an open mind about what we want to talk about, okay? It is all about making sure everyone is taken care of." The call ended before I could ask him what he meant by making sure everyone was taken care of. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my phone, before placing it face down on the counter beside the untouched newspaper. Something about the call did not sit right with me. Mark's voice carried that same guilty undertone I remembered from when he was 8 years old and had secretly taken money from Ruth's purse to buy candy. But this felt heavier than childhood mischief. This felt deliberate. I poured myself another cup of coffee and tried to push the uneasy feeling aside. Maybe Jenna really did want to fix things. Maybe I was overanalyzing a simple invitation. Still, as I sat back down, that phrase would not leave my mind. Making sure everyone is taken care of. In my experience, when people spoke like that, they usually meant themselves first. I looked again at Lily's drawing and smiled, despite the tension building in my chest. Whatever Mark and Jenna wanted to discuss could wait. Today was my granddaughter's 8th birthday, and that mattered more than adult complications. Even so, I made a quiet promise to myself to listen very carefully to whatever they had planned to say. About 20 minutes later, I stood in my bedroom closet, staring at the shirts Ruth would never see me wear again. I reached for a blue button-down, and the memory of her funeral rushed back. I remembered how Jenna had leaned close that day and murmured something about all this space in my house while we were still standing beside my wife's grave. Even then, there had been something calculating in her tone. I pulled the shirt from the hanger and caught my reflection in the mirror. $70,000. That was how much I had given Mark and Jenna over the past 3 years. Mortgage payments, car loans, Lily's private school tuition. Ruth would have said it was too much, but she also would have agreed that Lily deserved better than what her parents could manage on their own. As I finished getting dressed, my wallet felt heavier than usual in my back pocket. I did not yet know why, but I had the unsettling sense that before this day was over, that weight was going to matter far more than I expected. 3 credit cards were completely maxed out because of Mark's so-called emergencies. First, there was the transmission repair that was supposed to be urgent and inexpensive, which somehow turned into a full engine rebuild. Then there was Jenna's temporary request for grocery money. Something she promised was just to get them through a tight week, which quietly transformed into an unspoken monthly obligation. Every request came wrapped the same way, with Mark offering embarrassed explanations and Jenna following up with perfectly timed gratitude that made me feel heartless for even hesitating. As I walked toward the kitchen to grab my car keys, I passed the refrigerator again. Lily's most recent drawing was still taped there beside my shopping list. She had drawn our last fishing trip, 2 stick figures standing next to a bright blue lake, both of us smiling wide. Along the bottom, written carefully in purple marker, were the words, "Best day ever, Grandpa." Staring at that picture, Jenna's comment from a few weeks earlier suddenly snapped into focus with uncomfortable clarity. 3 weeks ago, standing in this same kitchen, she had slowly looked around and said, "Norman, do you not think this house is getting a little too big for you? There are some really lovely assisted living communities now. You would not have to worry about repairs or maintenance anymore." Mark had jumped in immediately, redirecting the conversation to Lily's softball season, but Jenna's eyes had lingered. They moved over my granite countertops, the high-end appliances Ruth and I had chosen together years ago, and the spacious layout of the kitchen. It was the same calculating look she had worn at Ruth's funeral, and at the time, I had tried not to read too much into it. I picked up my keys from the counter, and Ruth's last clear words echoed in my mind. "Promise me you will always take care of Lily," she had whispered, her voice barely there. "But watch Mark carefully. He is weak, and weak people make dangerous choices when someone stronger is guiding them." Back then, I had assumed she was talking about his old drinking friends or his habit of chasing get-rich-quick ideas. Now, I was not so sure. I wondered if Ruth had seen something in Jenna that I had ignored. Jenna always framed money discussions around Lily's needs, making me feel selfish or cold whenever I questioned the cost. The garage door opener hummed as sunlight spilled across my driveway and my black Mercedes. Ruth's car was still parked in its usual spot, covered and spotless. I had kept making payments on it for months after she passed, unable to accept that she was truly gone. Maybe that hesitation was what they were counting on. I had always been the grandfather who would rather pay than disappoint, who would rather trust than dig too deeply. But 40 years in construction had taught me a simple truth. You always inspect the foundation before committing to anything important. I backed out of the driveway slowly, watching my house grow smaller in the rear-view mirror. By the end of the day, after whatever conversation Mark and Jenna had planned, I suspected I would see everything differently. For now, I had a simpler mission. I needed to buy my granddaughter a birthday present, something meaningful, possibly the last gift I would give her before everything shifted. Northtown Mall was already alive with Saturday morning energy when I pulled into a parking spot near the main entrance. It was 8:15 in the morning, and families were streaming toward toy stores and clothing shops. The timing was perfect. I headed straight for the Lego section. Lily had become fascinated with buildings ever since her class visited the Space Needle on a school trip the month before. One set caught my attention immediately: the Statue of Liberty, detailed enough to challenge her growing patience and problem-solving skills, but not so complex that it would frustrate her. $180 felt reasonable for something that could keep her curious mind busy for weeks. "Excellent choice, sir," the young clerk said warmly as he rang up the purchase. "My daughter loves this collection. Would you like it gift-wrapped?" "Yes, please," I replied. "It is for my granddaughter's 8th birthday." From there, I walked into the sporting goods store. Lily had mentioned more than once that she wanted a real bicycle, not the small pink one she had clearly outgrown. A Trek model displayed near the front window looked just right. It had a lightweight frame, hand brakes she could control easily, and reflective strips built in for safety. $320 was not insignificant, but imagining the look on her face made the price irrelevant. As I loaded the boxed bicycle into the back of my sport utility vehicle, I checked my watch. 9:10 in the morning. I still had time for one more stop if I wanted. Norman, what a pleasant surprise. I turned to see Dorothy Henderson standing beside my vehicle, holding a shopping bag from the bookstore. I had known her for 15 years, and she looked genuinely happy to see me. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, even at this early hour. "Good morning, Dorothy," I said. "You are starting your weekend errands early." "You know me," she replied with a smile. "I prefer beating the crowds." She glanced toward the mall entrance. "Although I imagine you are here for birthday preparations. Mark mentioned Lily's party when I ran into him last week." "He mentioned it?" I asked, closing the rear hatch and turning back toward her. "Where did you see him?" "Downtown," she said casually. "Tuesday morning, I believe. Jenna was with him. They were coming out of First National Bank with quite a stack of paperwork." She laughed softly. They looked very serious and official, probably refinancing something, the way young people do these days. Tuesday, just 4 days earlier. Mark had not mentioned any bank visits during his anxious call that morning. Then again, people handled financial matters all the time without announcing them. "Probably routine business," I said, shifting my bags in my hands. "Of course, dear," Dorothy replied with a polite nod. But as I watched her walk away, the unease I had tried to ignore settled deeper in my chest. The pattern was impossible to ignore once I forced myself to line everything up honestly. 3 different credit cards had been pushed to their limits to cover Mark's so-called emergencies. There was the transmission issue that was supposed to be a quick fix and somehow spiraled into a full engine overhaul. There was also Jenna's brief request for grocery money, something she swore was only for a short stretch, which quietly turned into a standing monthly expectation. Every single request followed the same script. Mark would call with embarrassment heavy in his voice, and Jenna would follow up later with warm gratitude that made me feel cruel for even considering the word no. As I walked through the kitchen to grab my keys, I slowed near the refrigerator. Lily's newest drawing was still there beside my handwritten grocery list. She had sketched our last fishing trip together. 2 stick figures stood next to a bright blue lake, both of us smiling. Along the bottom, she had carefully written, Best day ever, Grandpa. In purple marker. Seeing that picture brought Jenna's comment from a few weeks earlier crashing back into my mind with uncomfortable sharpness. It had been 3 weeks ago, right here in this kitchen. Jenna had slowly looked around the room and said, "Norman, do you not think this house is starting to feel like too much for you? There are some very nice assisted living places now. You would not have to worry about upkeep or repairs anymore." Mark had immediately jumped in, redirecting the conversation toward Lily's softball games, but I had noticed where Jenna's attention lingered. Her eyes moved over the granite countertops, the high-end appliances Ruth and I had chosen together, and the space itself. It was the same calculating expression she had worn on her face at Ruth's funeral, an expression I had tried hard to forget. I picked up my keys from the counter, and Ruth's final clear words echoed in my head again. "Promise me you will always take care of Lily," she had said softly. "But be careful with Mark. He is weak, and weak people can make dangerous decisions when someone stronger is pushing them." At the time, I had assumed she meant his old drinking habits, or the half-baked business ideas he was always chasing. Now, I was no longer certain. I wondered if Ruth had noticed something in Jenna long before I did. Jenna had a way of framing every money conversation around Lily's needs, making me feel small and selfish whenever I questioned the costs. The garage door opener buzzed as sunlight spilled across my driveway and my silver Mercedes sport utility vehicle. Ruth's car was still parked in her usual spot, covered and spotless. I had continued making payments on it for months after she passed, unable to accept that she was truly gone. Maybe that hesitation was exactly what they were relying on. I had always been the grandfather who would rather pay than disappoint, who would rather trust than dig deeper. Still, 4 decades in construction had taught me a lesson I never forgot. Before you build anything meaningful, you check the foundation. I eased out of the driveway, watching my house shrink in the rearview mirror. By the time the day was over, after whatever conversation Mark and Jenna were clearly planning, I had a feeling my perspective would change. For the moment, I focused on what mattered most. I needed to buy my granddaughter a birthday present, something special, possibly the last gift I would give her before everything shifted. Lakeside Shopping Center was already buzzing with energy when I parked near the main entrance. It was just after 8 in the morning, and families were already pouring toward toy stores and clothing shops. The timing could not have been better. I headed straight for the Lego section. Ever since Lily's class had visited the observation tower downtown on a school trip last month, she had been fascinated by buildings and how they were made. One set caught my attention right away: the Statue of Liberty. It was detailed enough to challenge her growing skills without overwhelming her. $180 felt reasonable for something that would keep her engaged for weeks. "That is an excellent choice, sir," the young clerk said with a friendly smile as he rang it up. "My daughter loves this series. Would you like it wrapped as a gift?" "Yes, please," I said. "It is for my granddaughter's 8th birthday." My next stop was the sporting goods store. Lily had mentioned more than once that she wanted a real bicycle, not the small pink one she had clearly outgrown. A Trek model displayed near the window looked just right. It had a lightweight frame, hand brakes she could handle confidently, and reflective strips built in for safety. $320 was not cheap, but imagining her excitement made the decision easy. As I loaded the boxed bicycle into the back of my vehicle, I checked my watch. 9:10 in the morning. I still had time for one more errand. "Norman, what a pleasant surprise." I turned to see Dorothy Henderson standing beside my car with a bookstore bag tucked under her arm. I had lived next door to her for 15 years, and she genuinely seemed happy to see me. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Good morning, Dorothy," I said. "You are out early today." "You know me," she replied cheerfully. "I like getting things done before the crowds arrive." She glanced toward the mall entrance. "I imagine you are here getting ready for Lily's birthday. Mark mentioned the party when I ran into him last week." "He mentioned it?" I asked, closing the rear hatch and turning back toward her. "Where did you see him?" "Downtown," she said casually. "Tuesday morning, I believe. Jenna was with him. They were walking out of First National Bank with quite a stack of paperwork. She laughed lightly. They looked very serious and official, probably refinancing something like young couples tend to do. Tuesday, just a few days earlier. Mark had not mentioned any banking business during his nervous call that morning. Then again, people handled financial matters all the time without announcing them. Probably just routine business, I said, shifting the shopping bags to my other hand. Of course, dear, Dorothy replied with a polite smile. But as she walked away, the uneasy feeling in my chest tightened, refusing to be ignored. Nothing for you to worry about anyway, Dorothy said lightly as she patted my arm with familiar affection. I will let you finish your shopping. Give my love to that sweet granddaughter of yours. She headed back toward the bookstore, leaving me standing beside my vehicle with a faint but persistent sense of unease. Mark and Jenna at the bank on Tuesday. Then Mark's nervous call early Saturday morning. The timing felt a little too neat, but Mark had always lived in a state of minor financial chaos. There was always some issue, some looming expense, some problem he swore was temporary. I shook the thought away and walked toward the florist near the east entrance of the mall. Jenna had always liked flowers, and a bouquet of white roses felt like an appropriate gesture for the hostess of Lily's birthday party. Small efforts like that helped keep peace in a family, especially when unspoken tension hovered just below the surface. The florist, a middle-aged woman with soil still clinging beneath her fingernails, wrapped a dozen long-stemmed white roses in silver paper with practiced efficiency. They are lovely, she said, adjusting the ribbon. Special occasion? My granddaughter's birthday, I replied. They are for her mother. How thoughtful, she said warmly. She will appreciate them. $28 for flowers that would fade within a week felt excessive on principle, but Jenna's pleased expression would make it worthwhile. Maintaining harmony sometimes meant investing in gestures rather than arguments. By 9:30, my sport utility vehicle was filled with packages representing nearly $600 of birthday celebration. The Lego set, the bicycle, the roses, and the card I had carefully chosen. Every item was selected with Lily's happiness in mind. This was what grandfathers did. They spoiled their grandchildren without apology and took quiet joy in doing so. As I drove home through light Saturday traffic, my thoughts drifted back to Dorothy's casual comment. Mark and Jenna leaving the bank together, arms full of paperwork, looking serious and official. Mark had not mentioned any of it during his call earlier that morning. Still, married couples handled countless administrative matters without involving parents. Insurance updates, mortgage refinancing, savings plans for a child's future. There were plenty of reasonable explanations. Even so, as I turned into my driveway, I could not silence the small voice in my head, asking why Mark had sounded so tense if everything was truly routine. After wrapping Lily's gifts and eating a quick lunch, I arrived at Mark and Jenna's house exactly at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Before I could ring the bell, the front door swung open. "Norman," Jenna practically sang, throwing her arms wide as if we had not seen each other in months instead of just weeks. "You look absolutely wonderful today." The enthusiasm caught me off guard. Jenna usually offered a brief hug and a polite smile before retreating into hosting duties. Today, she touched my arm more than once as she spoke, her eyes bright with an energy I had never seen directed toward me. "Thank you, Jenna," I said. "Everything looks beautiful." I stepped inside, carefully maneuvering the boxed bicycle and the gift bag holding the Lego set. Colorful streamers hung from every doorway, and balloon clusters filled each corner of the house. The decorations were far more elaborate than in years past. "Dad, there he is!" Mark's voice rang out from the living room. "Come meet Eric from work. Eric, this is my incredible father I have told you so much about." Incredible father. That was new. Mark's usual stories about me tended to focus on my stubborn work habits or my refusal to fully retire. Today, he clapped a hand on my shoulder with exaggerated enthusiasm, laughing a little too loudly in the decorated hallway. The living room was already full. The Johnsons from next door chatted near the fireplace. Mrs. Keller sat carefully on the couch, observing everything with sharp, curious eyes. The Ramirez family helped their son set up party games on the coffee table. "Grandpa!" Lily ran straight toward me, her smile genuine and unfiltered. She wrapped her arms around my waist, and for a brief moment, the tension I had been carrying faded away. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, handing her the gift bag. "This one first. The big surprise comes later." She opened the Lego architecture set carefully, her eyes widening as she recognized the Statue of Liberty on the box. But when she looked up to thank me, something passed over her face, a flicker of sadness that disappeared the moment Jenna stepped closer. "Is that not generous of Grandpa?" Jenna said brightly. "Make sure you thank him properly, honey." "Thank you, Grandpa," Lily said. It is really cool." Her appreciation was sincere, but there was something else layered beneath it. Worry, guilt. An 8-year-old should not sound that heavy on her own birthday. Mark gently steered me toward the kitchen, where Eric Davidson stood nursing a beer and talking about sales numbers. The conversation itself was harmless enough, but Mark kept interrupting with unnecessary praise about my wisdom and leadership. "Dad knows everything about building strong relationships," Mark said, clapping me on the back again. "He taught me everything I know about trust and family loyalty." Each compliment felt awkward and rehearsed, like lines delivered from a script he had not practiced enough. And as I listened to him speak, that uneasy feeling returned, stronger than before. Trust and family loyalty. Those were strange themes to keep pushing during a casual birthday party, especially with the almost frantic energy Mark was putting behind every word. Eric nodded politely, clearly uneasy with how aggressively Mark was praising his own father. It felt less like conversation and more like performance. Jenna appeared again, this time carrying a tray of appetizers. She deliberately positioned herself between me and the rest of the guests, as if staking a claim. "Norman, you really have to try these canapes," she said brightly. "I made them especially with your refined tastes in mind." My refined tastes. That alone nearly made me laugh. Jenna had never shown the slightest interest in what I liked to eat, beyond making sure there was enough food to go around. Now she hovered close, refilling my wine glass before it was even half empty, and asking every few minutes if I was comfortable, warm enough, or needed anything. From across the room, I watched Lily open cards from her classmates. Her movements were polite and practiced, but distant, almost mechanical. When Tommy Ramirez asked about her new Lego set, she smiled and nodded, but the excitement I expected simply was not there. "She is growing up so quickly," Mrs. Keller said as she sat down beside me on the couch. "Such a thoughtful little girl. She asked me something unusual last week." My attention sharpened. "What did she ask you?" "She wanted to know whether parents and grandparents ever disagree about important decisions." My wine glass stopped halfway to my mouth. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her families work through differences with honesty and love," Mrs. Keller replied, though her eyes stayed fixed on Lily. There was concern there, the kind that suggested something more than ordinary childhood curiosity. Across the room, Mark and Jenna exchanged a quick look. No words, just a glance and a small nod. Then Jenna smoothly redirected a nearby conversation. I realized they had been doing that all afternoon. Brief eye contact, silent coordination, perfectly timed interruptions whenever discussions drifted too close to anything serious. The party dragged on under a layer of forced cheer. Every smile felt deliberate. Every laugh rang a little too loud. Every affectionate gesture seemed staged for whoever happened to be watching. The only genuine interactions I saw were between Lily and me, and even those were shadowed by something heavy she was clearly carrying. As guests began collecting coats and gift bags, Mark caught my eye and flashed what he probably thought was a relaxed smile. "Dad, hang around for a bit after everyone leaves, okay?" he said casually. "Jenna and I have really been looking forward to that family talk we mentioned earlier." By then, the artificial friendliness felt thick and oppressive. like the air before a storm breaks. I nodded politely and excused myself, mentioning the bathroom down the hall. Jenna jumped up instantly, offering directions I did not need, her concern sounding rehearsed rather than sincere. As I moved away from the noise of the party, I noticed Lily standing near the gift table, watching me. There was something in her expression that made me stop, worry mixed with determination. Then I heard soft footsteps behind me. "Grandpa?" Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. I turned and saw her glance back toward the living room, making sure no one was paying attention. The birthday girl, who should have been glowing with excitement, instead looked weighed down by something far too heavy for an 8-year-old. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling so we were eye to eye. I recognized that serious expression immediately. It was the same one Ruth used to get before difficult conversations. She bit her lower lip, just like her grandmother used to. "I need to tell you something important," she said quietly. "About Mom and Dad." My chest tightened. "What about them?" "They are planning to take your money tonight," she said quickly, the words spilling out as if she had been holding them in for too long. "After everyone goes home. I heard them talking last night when I was supposed to be asleep." For a moment, the hallway seemed to tilt. I reached out and steadied myself against the doorframe, forcing my face to stay calm for her sake. "What exactly did you hear?" I asked gently. "She said you have too much money for an old man living alone," Lily whispered. "Mom told Dad they were going to fix that problem tonight. Dad sounded scared, but Mom said the papers from the bank would make everything legal." Papers from the bank. Tuesday morning. Dorothy's casual comment snapped into place with sickening clarity. The instincts I had relied on for decades surged back to life. "Did they say anything else?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as my thoughts raced. "Dad kept asking what would happen if you found out," Lily said, tears filling her eyes. "And Mom said it would be too late by then." Her voice broke. "Grandpa, I do not want them to take your money. You are the only one who really listens to me." I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling her small body tremble against mine. The betrayal cut deeper knowing they had spoken so freely, so carelessly, within earshot of a child. "Listen to me very carefully," I whispered into her hair. "You did the right thing by telling me, but for now, this has to stay between us. Can you do that?" She nodded against my shoulder. "Are you going to stop them?" she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart," I said without hesitation. "I promise you, I will." "I am going to take care of everything," I told her quietly. I held her at arm's length so she could see my face clearly and understand that I meant every word. "But right now, we need to go back to your party and act like nothing is wrong. Can you be brave for me?" She sniffed and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "I think so," she said, then hesitated. "Grandpa, will you still love me if Mom and Dad get angry?" The question landed like a punch to my chest. "Lily," I said firmly, making sure she heard every word. "There is nothing your parents could ever do that would change how much I love you. Nothing at all. Do you understand me?" Relief washed over her face, and for the first time all afternoon, she smiled real. "I love you too, Grandpa," she whispered. Hand in hand, we walked back toward the noise of the party. In just a few quiet minutes, everything had shifted. The son I had raised, the daughter-in-law I had supported, the family I had trusted without reservation, all of it was now filtered through the sharp lens of deliberate betrayal. As we stepped back into the living room, I caught Mark's eye across the space. He smiled and waved with that same exaggerated cheerfulness that had unsettled me earlier. Now I understood exactly what that performance was meant to hide. Being back among the guests felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone else had forgotten they were acting. I slipped easily into conversation, drawing on the calm, practiced demeanor that 40 years of business negotiations had burned into my instincts. Outwardly, I was relaxed and cordial. Inwardly, I was tracking every glance Mark and Jenna exchanged with brutal clarity. Mrs. Keller was talking about her garden when I noticed Mark check his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. Almost immediately, Jenna appeared at his side. Their brief eye contact was no longer subtle. It was coordinated, intentional. They were managing me, I realized, keeping me comfortable, keeping me engaged. Most importantly, keeping me here for whatever they had planned once the guests were gone. "Norman, would you like some more wine?" Jenna asked, resting her hand lightly on my arm. "You look a little pale. Are you feeling all right?" Pale. Yes, I probably was. Finding out your own family is preparing to steal everything you worked for has that effect. Still, I managed a tired smile that did not feel entirely fake. "Just a small headache," I said. "Nothing serious." Her expression shifted for just a fraction of a second. It was the kind of micro-expression I had learned to recognize in boardrooms long ago. Relief mixed with calculation. A tired, slightly unwell old man would be easier to control than an alert one. For the next hour, I played my role perfectly. The gracious grandfather, the generous family patriarch, the aging man who might not be as sharp as he once was. I accepted their attention, complimented their hosting, and watched their increasingly obvious coordination with the detached focus of someone studying an opponent's strategy. Mark carefully redirected conversations anytime money, the economy, or retirement came up. Jenna smoothly steered discussions away from my house, my health, or my future living arrangements. They were controlling the flow of information, making sure nothing disrupted the story they were building for tonight's so-called important family discussion. Around 5:30, as the afternoon light stretched into long shadows and guests began gathering their coats, I made my move. "I think I should head home," I announced. "This headache is not getting any better." The reaction was immediate. Mark and Jenna exchanged a look that was no longer polite or controlled. It was alarm. "Dad, wait," Mark said quickly, stepping into my path. "We really wanted to talk about those important family matters we mentioned earlier. Remember? You said you would stay." "Another time," I replied gently, maintaining the weary grandfather act. "I really need to rest." "But Norman," Jenna said, stepping closer, her voice suddenly urgent. "We have something special planned for tonight, something we have been preparing for weeks." Preparing for weeks. The bank visit Dorothy had seen. The paperwork, the planning that required my presence and my compliance. I could see the desperation starting to crack through their polished performance as their carefully timed plan began to slip. "I am sure it can wait until tomorrow," I said calmly. "Family is not going anywhere." Mark's face flushed. "Actually, Dad, there are some time-sensitive issues we need to discuss." "Financial matters," he added, too quickly. "Things that really cannot wait. Financial matters that cannot wait." I stored that phrase away with everything else I had learned that day. "Tomorrow," I said evenly. "I promise." I turned toward Lily, who had been watching us with wide, worried eyes. Kneeling down, I pulled her into what might be our last innocent embrace before everything changed. "Thank you for such a wonderful birthday party, sweetheart," I said. "Thank you for my presents, Grandpa," she replied, her arms tightening around my neck. "I love you so much." "I love you too," I whispered into her ear, so softly only she could hear. "More than you will ever know. Everything is going to be okay." When I stood up, I felt Mark's hand settle on my shoulder. It was heavier than necessary, almost restraining. "Dad, please," he said quietly. "Just give us 1 hour. 1 hour to talk about these important family decisions." I looked into my son's eyes and no longer saw the boy I had raised. I saw a frightened, desperate man whose greed had finally drowned out whatever love remained. The realization hit harder than I expected, but my voice did not waver. "Another time, Mark," I said calmly. "I need to go home now." I walked toward my vehicle while they stood frozen in the doorway. Jenna leaned close to Mark, whispering urgently into his ear. Even from a distance, their frustration was unmistakable. For the first time that day, the exhausting performance dropped away from my shoulders. I felt lighter simply by leaving. Once inside my Mercedes, I sat in their driveway for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, fully absorbing what had just happened. My own family had planned to strip me of my money that night, using legal documents and careful preparation. They had counted on my presence, my trust, and my cooperation. I started the engine and pulled away from the house where I had just attended what might have been my last normal family gathering. When I stepped into my own home, the silence felt different than it had that morning. It was no longer calm or comforting. It was focused, purposeful. I walked straight to my home office, the room where I had built my construction company from one truck, long days, and stubborn determination. 40 years of records were hidden inside the wall safe, concealed behind Ruth's framed portrait. As I turned the dial, my fingers moved automatically. 1959, Ruth's birthday. The irony was not lost on me. Her memory was now protecting everything we had built together. Inside the safe, the documents told a story I had been too trusting to fully examine before. Bank statements showed a clear pattern of financial requests that had grown steadily over 3 years, starting with small amounts and escalating into thousands. Investment portfolios worth far more than Mark or Jenna likely realized. Property deeds for rental homes they did not even know existed. Most importantly, there was a complete record of every dollar I had given them. 247 separate transactions. I spread everything across my desk and documented it with the same methodical precision that had built my business. Mortgage payments, vehicle repairs, medical expenses, private school tuition for Lily. Every payment had been justified at the time by some family emergency or opportunity that sounded reasonable. Sitting there with Ruth's photograph watching from the bookshelf, I finally saw the truth without denial or sentiment. The steady increase in requests had not been accidental. It had been conditioning, training me to say yes to larger and larger amounts. Jenna's comments about assisted living had not been concern for my well-being. They had been reconnaissance. Every mortgage payment, every tuition check, I said quietly to Ruth's photo. They have been planning this for months. My phone sat silent on the desk. I knew Mark and Jenna were scrambling, trying to figure out how to proceed without me there for their so-called important family discussion. The thought brought me a grim sense of satisfaction. I opened my business contact file and found James Miller's personal number. James and I had shared over 20 years of professional respect and friendship. As vice president of First National Bank, he would remember me as the contractor who never missed a payment and never broke his word. More importantly, James would understand exactly what bank documents obtained under misleading circumstances actually meant. It was 9:30 at night, too late to call, so I made a note for the morning. First priority, find out exactly what paperwork Mark and Jenna had secured and how to neutralize its legal impact. Next, I reviewed my will and trust. They were standard documents, drafted years earlier when I still believed my son's judgment was guided by integrity rather than greed. Everything was set to pass to Mark, with protections in place for Lily's education and future. Those documents needed immediate revision. Catherine Davis had notarized most of my legal paperwork over the years. She was independent, discreet, and not connected to any financial institution where Mark or Jenna might have influence. Another call for the morning. I laid the investment statements across my desk like battle plans and calculated my net worth for the first time in years. $2.3 million in liquid assets, 3 rental properties. This house fully paid off, far more than Mark and Jenna suspected, and certainly more than they could steal in one evening. But this was not about money. This was about justice for an 8-year-old girl whose parents were willing to burden her with adult secrets. It was about consequences for 2 adults who had exploited an older man's love for his family. Ruth's voice echoed from our last conversation. Watch Mark carefully. Weak people make dangerous choices when someone stronger is guiding them. Now I understood completely. Jenna had been guiding him for 3 years, and Mark had chosen greed every single time. My phone rang suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. Sunday morning arrived with a clarity that the restless night had not provided. When I finally woke near dawn, my instincts were sharp and my plan was solid. Over coffee in my home office, I opened my contact file and dialed James Miller's personal number. 9 o'clock felt right for calling an old friend about financial matters. James and I had maintained our relationship through decades of loans, investments, and the steady growth of Price Construction. He would trust a call from me. "James, I hope I am not disturbing your Sunday morning," I said when he answered. "I have been reviewing my investment portfolio and wanted your thoughts on consolidating a few things." "Norman, it is always good to hear from you," James said warmly. "What is going on?" "I have been thinking about simplifying my finances," I replied. "Maybe consolidating accounts so everything is easier to manage." I was also curious about current banking policies related to financial assistance programs. "There are a few different options," James said. "It really depends on what level of support someone needs. Are you asking about automated services or more comprehensive management arrangements?" That was the opening I needed. "I was actually wondering about power of attorney structures," I said casually, "and conservatorship arrangements. Have you had any clients dealing with that sort of thing recently?" James paused, and I could almost hear him weighing professional discretion against our long friendship. "Funny you should ask," he said finally. "Just last week, I had a married couple asking very detailed questions about guardianship procedures for an elderly family member." My coffee froze halfway to my mouth. "Oh," I said. "I imagine that is a complicated process." "Not the way they approached it," James replied. "They were extremely prepared. They had clearly done a lot of research. Conservatorship requirements, documentation timelines, the whole thing. Very thorough people." "Very thorough." My own son and daughter-in-law had not just considered stealing from me. They had studied exactly how to do it legally. "That sounds considerate," I said carefully. "Helping family like that." "They were asking very specific questions," James continued. "Mental competency evaluations, financial management records, timelines for court approval. Honestly, they understood the terminology better than many attorneys I have worked with. Mental competency evaluations, court approval timelines. They had planned to have me declared incapable and take control of everything I had built over 4 decades. "Did they seem confident?" I asked, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. "Extremely," James said. "They mentioned having documentation ready, medical opinions lined up, and said they expected the process to move quickly once it started." He chuckled lightly. "Most families are nowhere near that organized when dealing with elder care transitions." Elder care transitions. The clinical phrasing made my grip tighten around the phone. They had engineered a legal pathway to strip me of my independence and my assets, and they had done it methodically. "It sounds like they were very focused on doing everything properly," I said. "That was what stood out," James replied. "They asked about expedited filings and emergency conservatorship procedures." Emergency conservatorship. The option used when someone is deemed an immediate risk to themselves or their finances. Hearing my own life reduced to a procedural checklist was surreal. "Well, I appreciate the insight," I said. "It helps me understand what options exist." "Anytime, Norman," James said. "Though between us, you seem sharper than men half your age. I cannot imagine you needing that kind of intervention anytime soon." If only he knew how close I had come the night before. "Let us hope you are right," I said. "Thank you for taking my call on a Sunday." "Always," James replied. "Let me know if you want to set up a formal review of your portfolio." After the call ended, I sat quietly, staring at the notes I had written. Mental evaluations, medical opinions, emergency filings. Mark and Jenna had not just planned to steal my money. They had constructed a legal framework to erase my autonomy. The phone rang again, pulling me out of my thoughts. Mark's name lit up the screen. This time, I answered. "Hello," I said, letting weariness seep into my voice, as if lifting the phone itself required effort. "Dad, thank goodness," Mark said. "I was really worried about you leaving so suddenly yesterday. Are you feeling okay?" Concern coated his words, but now I could hear the calculation beneath it. Oh, Mark. I let my voice drift, as though my thoughts were slow to form. These headaches have been terrible. I can barely focus on anything. That does not sound good, he said quickly. Maybe you should see a doctor. Jenna and I could drive you to a clinic this afternoon. Perfect. They were speeding up their plan, exactly as I hoped they would once their original timeline was disrupted. That is very kind of you, I said softly. I have been feeling so confused lately. Do not worry, Dad, Mark said. We will take care of everything. We will be there in about an hour, all right? After the call ended, I spent the next 30 minutes preparing for the most important performance of my life. I tousled my hair until it looked unkempt. I pulled on an old cardigan that made my shoulders sag and my frame look smaller. I practiced slower movements, longer pauses, the subtle hesitation of someone genuinely struggling to think clearly. When their car finally pulled into my driveway, I was ready. Norman, we brought some paperwork that might help with what you are dealing with, Jenna said as they settled into my living room. She set a leather portfolio on the coffee table, sleek and professional, the kind lawyers use when lives are about to be rearranged. Papers? I blinked at Jenna with what I hoped looked like genuine confusion. What kind of papers? Mark leaned forward, putting on an earnest expression that would have convinced me a week ago. Dad, we have been looking into ways to help you manage things better, he said. Your finances, medical decisions, stuff like that. Manage? I repeated, letting the word hang as if it did not quite register. I rubbed my temples like the effort of thinking was physically painful. I do not know. Everything feels so complicated these days. Jenna opened the leather portfolio with smooth, practiced efficiency, like she had done this 100 times. These documents would give us power of attorney, she explained, her tone gentle and reassuring. It would let us help with your banking, bills, and medical appointments. Think of it like a backup system, so you are not carrying everything alone. The forms looked professionally prepared. Sections were highlighted. Signature lines were clearly marked. Whoever created this package knew what they were doing, and someone had spent serious money making sure this theft looked respectable. I stared down at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. It is all so overwhelming, I murmured. I used to understand these things better. That is exactly why we should handle it now, Jenna said softly but firmly, before everything gets more confusing for you. Mark shifted in his seat, his discomfort barely contained. Dad, he said, are you sure you are okay? You seem different today. I looked at him with what I hoped was confused gratitude, the expression of a man who felt vulnerable and appreciative. Different? I said. I do not feel different. I just feel tired all the time. These headaches make it hard to think clearly. Mark and Jenna exchanged a quick look, the same coordinated communication I had noticed at the party. But now I understood exactly what they were doing. They were assessing me, measuring whether I seemed impaired enough to sign away my life without fully grasping what I was signing. Norman, Jenna continued, leaning in slightly, these papers would just make it easier for us to help you. You would not have to worry about managing everything by yourself. I suppose that would be nice, I said slowly, picking up one document with deliberately trembling hands. But this is such a big decision. My head is pounding trying to think it through. Of course it is a big decision, Mark said quickly. Take your time. Jenna's patience was thinner. She kept the smile, but the strain was visible if you knew where to look. Would it not be easier with family support? She pressed. You trust us, do you not? Of course I trust you, I said gently. You are my family. I set the papers back down with care, as if I did not trust my hands. But could I sleep on it? I added, letting my voice drag as though my thoughts were foggy. Maybe decide tomorrow when I am thinking more clearly. These headaches make everything feel fuzzy. Mark and Jenna looked at each other again. Jenna's frustration flashed for a split second before she smoothed it away. Sure, Mark said, forcing cheerfulness. We will come by tomorrow morning, and you can sign then. After they left, I let my shoulders drop and finally allowed the performance to end. For the first time in hours, I sat still and breathed. The documents they had left behind told the whole story. Power of attorney forms that would hand them control of my finances, medical decisions, and living arrangements. It was everything James had described, now sitting on my coffee table in neat legal language, designed to steal my independence while calling it support. 3 hours later, I was in my home office, reviewing my notes from their visit like a commander planning a counterstrike. The power of attorney packet lay spread across my desk. Professional forms, carefully organized, every signature line highlighted in yellow, every witness requirement marked. They had done their homework, but they had forgotten I had spent 40 years doing mine. I picked up my phone and dialed Catherine Davis. She answered on the second ring. "Norman, good evening. How can I help?" "Catherine," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I need notary services tomorrow morning for some sensitive family financial documents. Could you come to my house around 10 o'clock? "Of course," she replied immediately. "What type of documents are we talking about?" I chose my wording carefully. Power of attorney forms. It is a delicate family matter, so I would appreciate your discretion. "You know you can count on that," she said. "I will bring my seal and my journal." "Perfect," I replied. Catherine had notarized dozens of construction contracts for me over the years. She knew how to spot coercion, irregular pressure, and questionable circumstances. It was part of her professional training, and I intended to use that. Next, I called James Miller. "James," I said when he answered, "could you stop by tomorrow morning around 10? I have been thinking about our conversation, and I want to review my portfolio in detail." "Certainly, Norman," he replied. "Given what we discussed about financial management assistance, a thorough review sounds wise." "Good," I said. "It might be educational." James chuckled. "All right, I will bring what I need. 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock, I confirmed. Educational was the right word. James would see exactly what Mark and Jenna tried to do, and as a bank executive, he would understand the implications immediately. More importantly, his presence would lend weight to anything we needed to document. Then I made the final call. I dialed Mark. I let my voice carry the same fragile uncertainty I had performed so carefully the day before. "Mark," I said softly, "I have been thinking about those papers you brought over. You were right. I do need help managing things." There was a brief pause, then relief rushed into his voice. "Dad, that is great news. Jenna is going to be so relieved. We can come over first thing tomorrow morning." "I have already arranged for a notary," I added. "I want everything handled properly and legally. 10 o'clock sharp." "Perfect," Mark said quickly. "And Dad, thank you for trusting us." Trust. The word tasted bitter, but I kept my tone warm. "You are my family. Of course I trust you." After the call ended, I walked to the window overlooking my backyard. Ruth's rose garden needed attention again, another responsibility I had taken on alone since she passed. Tomorrow would decide whether I continued tending it as a free man, or watched it wither from the window of some assisted living facility while Mark and Jenna divided up the life Ruth and I had built together. I took out a yellow legal pad and wrote down the timeline I expected for the next morning. 9:45. Catherine arrives and sets up her notary materials. 10 o'clock. James arrives with portfolio documentation. 10:05. Mark and Jenna arrive, expecting easy signatures. 10:15. The truth surfaces. The irony was almost poetic. They had carefully researched how to strip me of my independence through legal procedures, forgetting one critical detail. Legal processes require witnesses, transparency, and documentation. Tomorrow, those same safeguards would expose their betrayal. Somewhere across town, Mark was probably telling Jenna how cooperative I sounded, how the notary would make everything official, how close they were to controlling millions of dollars. I imagined them celebrating quietly, convinced that a confused old man had finally accepted their help. They had no idea they were walking straight into a trap set by the same disciplined mind that had built what they were trying to steal. I glanced at Lily's drawing on the refrigerator. Our crooked little stick figure family stood beside a lopsided house. Tomorrow would determine whether that little girl grew up knowing her grandfather protected her, or learned from her parents that loyalty could be bought and sold. Ruth's voice echoed in my memory. "Promise me you will always take care of Lily." I fully intended to keep that promise. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I barely slept, but by the time Catherine arrived at 9:45 with her notary seal and journal, I felt completely steady. "Good morning, Norman," she said warmly as she stepped into my home office. "This is a beautiful workspace." "Thank you," I replied. "Everything should be straightforward." At exactly 10 o'clock, James knocked on the door, carrying his banker's portfolio. "Morning, Norman," he said. "Ready to review that portfolio?" "More ready than you realize," I said, taking my seat behind the desk just as footsteps sounded at the front door. Mark and Jenna entered moments later, confident smiles on their faces, Jenna carrying the familiar leather document case. They slowed when they noticed Catherine and James already seated, but Jenna recovered quickly. "How thoughtful," she said smoothly. "Having professionals present will make everything feel so official." "It certainly will," I replied evenly. "Please, have a seat." Mark settled into the chair across from my desk, still smiling. "You sound much better today, Dad. More like yourself." "Exactly like myself," I said, meeting his eyes. "Clear-headed, observant, fully capable." I leaned forward slightly. "Which is why I need to say something before anyone signs anything." Jenna's pen froze above her checklist. "Norman, what is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong with me," I said calmly. "But I am completely aware of your plan." The silence stretched tight. Mark's smile faltered. "Dad, what plan? We are here to help you." "I know about your visit to James's bank last Tuesday," I continued. "I know about the guardianship and conservatorship procedures you researched. I know about the mental competency evaluations you intended to arrange." Color drained from Mark's face. Jenna's expression cracked for just a fraction of a second before she tried to recover. "Norman," she said carefully, "you are confused. We went to the bank for our own financial planning." "James," I said, turning toward my friend, "would you mind explaining what they discussed during their appointment?" James straightened, professional and composed. "They asked detailed questions about conservatorship procedures, documentation required to declare someone mentally incompetent, and expedited court processes for emergency financial control." Catherine looked up sharply from her notary journal. "Mr. Price, are you saying these power of attorney documents were prepared under false pretenses?" I met her eyes without hesitation. "I am saying they planned to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of everything I spent 40 years building." Mark opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Jenna's carefully rehearsed composure finally collapsed. "And now," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "you have witnesses." Mark finally managed to speak, though his voice came out tight and strained. "Dad, we were worried about you. Yesterday you seemed so confused." "Yesterday I was acting," I replied evenly. "Today you are seeing exactly who I am." I opened my desk drawer and laid out the documentation I had prepared. 247 separate transactions over 3 years, I said calmly. $70,000 in direct support, every mortgage payment, every car repair, every private school tuition bill, all documented, categorized, and time-stamped. Jenna leaned forward, desperation bleeding into her voice. "Those were legitimate family expenses." "They were conditioning payments," I said, meeting her eyes. "You trained me to say yes to increasingly larger sums until I would eventually agree to sign away my independence." Her face stiffened. "You researched exactly how to institutionalize me," I continued, "while dividing my assets between yourselves." Catherine set her pen down slowly. "This is extremely irregular. I need to understand the full context before I notarize anything." "The full context," I said, is that my son and daughter-in-law spent weeks researching legal procedures to strip me of my autonomy. You consulted attorneys about guardianship processes and planned to have me declared mentally incompetent using manufactured evidence of confusion. Mark's hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his chair. We just thought you might need help managing things. Managing a net worth of $2.3 million plus 3 rental properties. My voice hardened. Help that required consultations about emergency conservatorship procedures? Jenna stood abruptly. You are twisting this. We love you. Love does not involve conspiracy, I replied flatly. Love does not involve researching how to steal someone's independence while they are still healthy and competent. James spoke quietly, his tone professional. Norman, the questions they asked were highly specific. They understood legal terminology most families never encounter unless they are planning something significant. Catherine nodded. In my experience, legitimate family planning does not involve researching mental competency evaluations. The room fell silent except for Mark's uneven breathing. He looked at me differently now, as if finally seeing the man behind the role of father. What happens now? He asked quietly. I stood, feeling every year of my age and every ounce of experience I had earned. Now, I said, we discuss consequences. Consequences, I repeated, opening my desk drawer again and removing the documents I had prepared over the weekend. I am changing my will effective immediately. My estate will be placed into an educational trust for Lily, accessible when she turns 21. Mark leaned forward, panic breaking through. Dad, please. We made mistakes. We can fix this. The trust will fully cover her undergraduate education, I continued calmly. Graduate school if she chooses, and provide startup funding for whatever career path she selects. I spread the revised documents across the desk. Catherine, I need these witnessed and notarized. Jenna's voice cracked. Norman, you cannot do this to your own family. I am protecting my family, I said firmly, from parents who were willing to steal their daughter's grandfather's independence to fund their lifestyle. Catherine reviewed the paperwork carefully. These terms are very specific, Mr. Price. There are conditions attached. Yes, I said. If Mark and Jenna formally renounce all claims to my estate and demonstrate genuine change over the next year, I will reconsider. They will need to prove they have become the parents Lily deserves. James nodded as he signed as a witness. The trust structure is sound. She will have opportunities you were never in a position to guarantee directly. Mark dropped his face into his hands. What does genuine change even mean? How do we prove that? By earning your own income, I replied. By supporting your family without relying on me. By putting Lily's well-being above your desire for my money. Show me she matters more to you than my bank account. Jenna stood again, her composure finally shattering. How are we supposed to survive without your support? The same way millions of families do, I said, through honest work and responsible spending. The mortgage assistance ends today. The car payments stop immediately. You are both adults with college degrees. You will figure it out. Catherine completed the notarization with professional efficiency. Everything here is legally binding. You should store these documents securely. My attorney will have copies by this afternoon, I replied. After Catherine and James left with quiet handshakes and assurances of discretion, the three of us remained seated in heavy silence. Mark looked defeated. Jenna's eyes moved constantly, already calculating what came next. Is there anything else you want to say? I asked. Mark finally looked up and met my eyes. I am sorry, Dad. I know that does not undo what we did, but I am genuinely sorry. I studied him for a long moment before answering. For Lily's sake, I said quietly, I hope one day that apology becomes something real. Jenna said nothing at all, and that silence told me more than any argument ever could. Words are easy, Mark, I said quietly. What matters is what you do over the next year. Your actions will decide whether this family has any future together. 3 hours later, there was a soft knock at my front door. When I opened it, Lily stood there with her school backpack still hanging off one shoulder. "Grandpa?" she asked carefully. "Mommy said you wanted to see me?" I knelt down to her level, just like I had in the hallway a couple of days earlier. "Come sit with me, sweetheart," I said gently. "We need to talk about some grown-up things." She climbed onto the couch beside me, her small face already serious. Even at 8 years old, she could sense when something important had shifted. "Is this about what I told you?" she asked quietly. "Partly," I said. "Your mom and dad made some bad choices about money, and there have to be consequences. But none of this changes how much I love you. Not even a little." She thought about that for a moment. "Are they in trouble?" "They have some hard lessons to learn," I said carefully. "They need to learn how to take better care of themselves and of you. But I want you to hear this clearly, Lily. Your future is completely safe." Her eyes lifted to mine. "I have made special arrangements," I continued, "to make sure you can go to any college you want and study anything that excites you." Her expression softened, then brightened just a little. "Even veterinary school?" she asked. "That is really expensive." I smiled. "Especially veterinary school. And if you change your mind and decide you want to be an engineer or a teacher or start your own business someday, there will be money for that too." She hesitated again. "What about Mom and Dad?" "They are going to have to work very hard to become better parents," I said honestly. "If they do, maybe our family can heal from what happened. But even if they do not, you and I will always have each other." She wrapped her arms around me tightly, and I held her close. In that moment, I felt Ruth's presence as clearly as if she were standing right beside us. 3 generations of love continuing forward, even after betrayal and broken trust. "Can we look at college brochures?" Lily asked after a moment. "I want to see what veterinary schools look like." "Absolutely," I said with a smile, reaching for my laptop. "We have plenty of time to plan your future." Outside the window, spring was giving way to summer, and in the backyard, Ruth's roses were finally beginning to bloom.